Hi everyone, Big Thinny Rush Tano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, and it's time for a classic review of the Magnetic Fields album, 69 Love Songs. Here we have the seminal 1999 album from Boston, Mass-based indie legends, the Magnetic Fields. Now, over the years, the Magnetic Fields have taken on numerous shapes and forms and lineups, dating back to their formation in the late 80s. In fact, the project's history goes back even further than that if you count material released under the name Buffalo Rome. But regardless of what era of Magnetic Fields music you're listening to, the project has always been masterminded by poet, multi-instrumentalist, producer, and singer-songwriter Mr. Stephen Merritt. Now, in the first leg of the Magnetic Fields discography, really everything up until this point, the band's music was really like a lot of lo-fi, homespun synth pop and indie rock, very rough around the edges, but still quite sweet, catchy, and lyrically witty, with most of the songs being fronted by Stephen Merritt's entrancing, very bassy vocal range. For the most part, I would call the group's early work solid, but not necessarily revolutionary. Certainly not as ambitious as the album I'm talking about in this video, especially when you take into account all of the indie, twee, and minimal pop groups that were burgeoning at the time and prior. But I will say Stephen Merritt's knack for hooks, his sense of humor, his poetic lyrical game, as well as his keen ear for simple but effective instrumentation would all lay the groundwork for what would become 69 Love Songs and build it into the success that it was. And it's kind of funny because originally this thing wasn't necessarily even intended to be an album, but a theatrical review of sorts fronted by a myriad of different singers and figures. In interviews, Merritt has acknowledged that he was essentially borrowing some inspiration from a Charles Ives songbook of over 100 songs, essentially challenging himself to write around the same amount of tunes, but focusing instead on love songs. But when realizing this may just be too many songs, he decided to settle instead on 69. And with this record, what you see is what you get. There are literally 69 love songs in the track list of this album. I suppose there are a handful that, you could debate whether or not they're actually love songs in the traditional sense. But yeah, you really do get 3 volumes, 23 songs each on this record. The runtime is almost 3 hours in length. And to this day, this album is still one of the biggest shots in the dark in indie history. In 1999, when the Magnetic Fields were dropping this record or gearing up to drop this record, they were building a pretty solid multi-album relationship with Merge Records, which was a burgeoning indie label at the time. They were beginning to hit a stride of artistic successes during this era with the likes of Lamb Chop, as well as Neutral Milk Hotel and Superchunk, later the band Spoon. Still, I imagine on some level it would have been very stressful to take a risk on a record of this size. But when faced with the variety and creativity of the 3 volumes of this album, the temptation to put it out was most likely too great. This is kind of a record you have to put out, because musically and conceptually there was just simply nothing out there like it at the time, and for years to come too. I mean, maybe the concept and the angle of 69 Love Songs seems a little less novel during an age when you have all of these kind of quirky music influencers, not to mention literally anybody can upload any number of songs to any number of digital projects that have whatever wild concepts you can come up with absolutely no label approval whatsoever. However, I would argue that a lot of that wouldn't exist without records such as this paving the way first. And I most certainly wouldn't limit this album's cultural impact to just its concept. The music and the aesthetics of these songs have certainly left an impression on many a musician, big and small too. I mean, the song Let's Pretend We're Bunny Rabbits, for example, sounds like literally any number of hypnagogic pop songs that would be cropping up during the blog era and the lo-fi wave of the late 2000s. Meanwhile, long-forgotten fairy tales, writing, and melodies sound way too similar to a bunch of melodic ideas and refrains that Vampire Weekend incorporates into track after track after track on their records. There are also multiple ballads on this album that are just so relentlessly ripped off by many a dramatic theatrical voice on the indie folk scene. Not to mention country it boy Orville Peck covered the song Papa Was a Rodeo for his recent collab Heavy Stampede album. And of course, how could I forget to mention Mr. Peter Gabriel, who covered the song Book of Love for his 2010 Scratch My Back record. 69 Love Songs is just such a huge, sprawling album that is so widely acclaimed. Its influence is kind of difficult to gauge, but believe me when I say it's there. But what about the actual music on this record? Because it is a review. Look, I'll say this. I would have to be insane to literally go over every song on this record and its finer details. We would wind up with a video here that is like longer than the Magnetic Fields album itself. So unfortunately, I'm not going to quite take it that far, but what I will say is this. There are a few key qualities that I think make this such a magic album. The first of which is lyricism and wit. Really, Stephen Merritt's masterful way with words across this album, coining phrases like unboyfriendable. But yeah, nearly all 69 songs on this record have left me with lyrics over the years that just stay echoing in my head long after I'm done listening to these tracks. And beyond the lyricism, I would say the next major important aspect of this record is just the variety across it. I mean, we are talking about a record of songs that are singularly focused on pretty much one topic. However, we get that topic from so many different angles and relationship types. We have heterosexual relationships and homosexual relationships being described in these songs and everything in between. We have songs that are about being deeply infatuated with someone. We have songs that are about essentially falling out of love with someone. We have songs about being hurt in love. We have songs about being kind of just only halfway there in love. And of course, in usual Magnetic Fields fashion, we have songs on this thing that take on a bit more of an electronic or a synth pop style. But beyond that, we have indie rock tracks, we have punk tracks, we have songs that are a little baroque in tone, we have songs that are country fried or quite folky. We also have Love Is Like Jazz, which is like an improvised piss take of sorts. And that's the thing, the way the band embodies genres on this record, I imagine some might feel is a bit too overly simplistic, but that's not really the point. The band is not here to try to impress you with their chops or their highbrow aesthetics. No, the rudimentary approach in this case works because there's a certain element of camp to all of these performances, a certain melodrama. It's like every song on some level is a loving parody of another idea, which again makes sense in the context of these songs being a part of a review, because musically speaking, these tracks are a lot like acting in a sense. So if there's any real consistency to these songs beyond them being love songs, it's that, because every track in its own way is like a little scene. Whether it's one about a woman who claims to love Washington, D.C., but only because her baby lives there, or a guy who's feeling very happy-go-lucky and like he can take on the world and, get the girl despite him being so goddamn ugly just because he has a car, or someone who can tell that their lover is actually in love with someone else. And that's another thing, the emotional range of this record. Some tracks on here are genuinely quite heart-wrenching. Others are very funny and tongue-in-cheek. Some tracks are quite lengthy and epic and grandiose in tone and their emotional intent and their instrumentation. Others are simply a cappella or less than a minute in length. There are straightforward rockers on this thing, true to its kind kind of intent as being a musical review. There are other tracks that feel like an internal musical monologue that you would be hit with from a character in the midst of a play. There are songs on this thing that are very dark and morbid. There are others that, frankly, are some of the most beautiful that I've ever heard. And look, I'm not going to bullshit you. I don't even think every single song on this album is good. Yeah. It turns out when you force yourself to write 69 whole songs with a super wide range of qualities, like not all of them are going to be great. However, even in its lowest moments, I do think that 69 Love Songs stays entertaining and interesting as well. I mean, I can at least give the tracks I'm not crazy about credit for being kind of out there, or at least like taking a risk and doing something unexpected. I don't want to belabor this review or anything, so what I will do is just make a few recommendations here and say that if you listen to this album, I think you should listen to it in chunks, you know, maybe just like one volume at a time. And if you enjoyed this very diverse concept-based album, please go further into the Magnetic Fields discography, because this album really kind of like revolutionized the band's output as they would further dive into a lot of concept-based albums past this point, whether that be concepts around the sounds of the instrumentals, or you know, even Stephen Merritt's recent 50-song memoir album where he wrote a song for every year of his life up until that point. And the band is still doing their thing to this day. They even dropped not too long ago a record of quickies where they just pretty much did one short song after another. But yeah, after doing so many classic reviews, I figure it's been time to kind of talk about this record and really wrestle with how difficult of an album this is to talk about. Look, it's not just an album, it's an experience, and it's one that I implore that, you know, you guys go on. If you have, let me know in the comments. I'm sure you will. But yes, classic album, incredible record, 69 Love Songs. Transition, have you given this album a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up with a link to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, 69 Love Songs, forever.